You're listening to the SweetLife Entrepreneur Podcast. Simplified strategies to grow your service business and launch a life you love faster. With business mentor and entrepreneur activator, April Beach.
So that won't be any problem.
Okay. Yeah, just pick the right one and you can just copy and paste it in there. It's also our authorization form to be able to record the show with you. Okay, awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this. This is just too good to be true.
It's been a long time coming.
It has been, but we have done this over and over.
We have, which we have, is why I kind of made a script, because we could talk forever and go down a rabbit hole, and nobody wants that.
I know, nobody wants that. Okay, all right, here we are. Let me mark our start time for Brittany. Hey, woohoo! Only 2:43. Some behind the scenes are like 20 minutes long. All right. Okay, you guys, I am joined by my very, very good longtime friend, Liz McFadden. And I have to say, before we dive into these 3 episodes, you are in store for 3 amazing episodes on branding, who needs a brand, what isn't a brand, how to develop your brand, how to use your brand. And Liz is going to take it away and really walk you strategically through the guidance of how to do that. But I have to tell you kind of the backstory a little bit of how Liz and I know each other so well. We're kind of like business sisters. When I first found Liz, I had just launched one of my first companies and I was so excited about everything I did. And I had like this great logo, which was by luck. I think I ended up with a great logo because I had never actually gone through a branding process. And we went to this, I think it was like a mom entrepreneur event. Wasn't it?
Something like that.
Yes. In Denver. And Liz had young kids and I had young kids. And so we were promoting to other moms. Yeah, mom-based businesses. And I got there and and we just hit it off right away. But she asked me this question and I didn't know the answer to it. And she's like, great, well, tell me about your brand. And I just wanted to show her my logo. I'm like, well, here it is. It's like this really cool, like pea in a pod thing. And I paid a lot of money for it. And I think it looks really good. And she's like, no, tell me about your brand. Like, what's your brand story? And I had no idea actually how to explain that to her. So even though I had been an entrepreneur for a really long time, I think a lot of people had missed the entire importance and understanding of really what branding is and why it's important and why we need to have branding. And that was, like 2006, 2007, I think, when we first met. And so Liz really taught me everything I know about branding. And we ended up co-authoring multiple books, 2 different books together. And she and I've created online courses together. We have a long history of doing business together, launching and developing entrepreneurs. And many of you guys who I know are faithful listeners to the show already know Liz. You know her voice. She's been on many of the online courses that you guys have taken through my businesses, and we all love her. So that's a very long introduction to why she is so important. I love this lady. She has 3 boys. I have 3 boys. Like, our husbands have the same birthday. Like, so many things different align with us, but I know you're going to love her as much as I do. But more importantly than that, I know you need what she's talking about today and on the next couple of shows. So I was really, really excited to get her to agree to come on and talk to us. So, hey, that's a long intro.
I love it. And thank you so much for having me. I feel so honored to be on the show because not only are we great friends and we've worked together for so long, but I am I listen to this show every week. I love it. So I feel so honored to be on here.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, so give everybody a little bit of, not the history I gave, because you have your own really impressive history. Give them a little bit of history of how you got into doing what you're doing, and really what a little story of what that was like in the beginning of launching and growing your business with small kids, because I know a lot of our listeners do have kids and they are growing business simultaneously, and I know that they will appreciate hearing how you walk through that too.
Yeah, so let me kind of start where I am now, and I'll almost walk backwards. So I am one of the founding members of Novella Brand House, and I'm the managing director. So I lead all the operations of the business and new business endeavors, and then lead the brand strategy part of our work. I've been in the advertising industry for over 20 years. I'm actually one of those weird people that what I went to college for and learned how to do, I'm still doing because I love it. So, that's where I am now. And now my kids, April, as you mentioned, I have 3 boys, so 16-year-old, 13, and 10. But when I started, my career, obviously I didn't have any kids, and then I started having kids. And at that time, 16 years ago, you could not work at an ad agency with a small child and kids. I mean, it just wasn't going to work. So I basically had to leave my job. But I always loved advertising, and I missed it. And I started thinking like, okay, how can I create a business? How can I do what I love, but I have, a husband. And at that point I had 1 child. And at that time we lived in this small town in Alabama. So I was like constantly thinking. And then we moved to Chicago, and I had the idea of a virtual ad agency. And at that time, I'm really one of the very first people to start something like that. That did not exist. Partly because high-speed internet came along. I mean, that's how long we're... It's crazy. But high-speed internet came along. But I had worked at 2 large ad agencies. So I had this awesome network of people that I had worked with. And I thought, what if we created this virtual ad agency? We could work with small to mid-sized businesses, because a traditional ad agency just they couldn't handle those kinds of clients. And I could work I could work it from home. I could work it around my family life. And so I did. And so I did that 13 years ago and started. And I continued to grow and scale the company. And then 7 years ago, I met my now business partner, Claire McLaren, and we merged our 2 companies together to create Novella Brand House. I want to note that Claire also has children. She has 4 boys, and her boys are about the same ages of mine. So I say that because when we started this business 7 years ago, our kids were much younger and needed a lot more attention, and not that they do now, but you know what I mean. And so we've actually grown this business and scaled it as we were able to, as our kids grew, and we were able to then, move our office out of our house into a real office, and then now an even bigger office. And so that's kind of the story. And I'd say all that because people ask me all the time, they're like, how did you do this? And you have kids, and did you just start like with an office in downtown Kansas City? No, I didn't. I started actually in a little basement office space in my house. And so it's been a process.
It has.
So that's kind of... So that's kind of how I've scaled the business, and with kids, working that around my lifestyle. But like I said, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I was lucky enough to work on the Sprint account back in the 90s. And Sprint was really, I'm really aging myself, but they were really at that time totally embracing this whole kind of this new, not new age, but a new take on branding, because branding has been around for a really long time. And I sort of learned from some of the best people and, did that for a number of other clients, large clients. And then when I left the large ad agency, I said, hey, there's no reason why small businesses can't be creating brands, and they should be. And so then I figured out, how do you take this sort of big approach that you use for big companies, and how do small companies do that?
Yeah.
So,
and that's when I found you. Well, after that period of time, and your ability to help me take my vision, my purpose, and what I was doing, and turn it into a branding story, and then to teach me, and then to turn around and teach the businesses that I was launching was really, it's not honestly an overly difficult process. Mm-hmm. It actually, I think there's a certain side of branding that might seem like, to me, maybe I'm wrong, that might seem like people might overlook because they think it's not important. Maybe it's something that's common sense or something that people just automatically know. And I think that that's where they go wrong. And so, you have been awarded, you've been recognized for the work that you've done. You're very well known in this space. And so one of the things that I say that because I know that there are a lot of podcasts out there and a lot of people talk about branding and they end up talking about, Instagram filters and all these different colors. And that is a certain aspect of branding, but that's not the heart and soul. That's not the first part of branding. That's not the most important part actually of branding that we're talking about here today. And so that's why I want people to understand that that this is a fundamental knowledge that you have to have as an entrepreneur. And Liz is going to take us through the steps of really what we call, big business branding for small entrepreneurs, because you guys need to be doing this too. And when you do it, when you get it right, when you do what Liz is going to teach you how to do on these next couple of podcast episodes, your business is going to skyrocket above others in your space, in your niche, because they don't get it, because they're not doing it right. And so that's one of the promises I can make to you here by hanging out with us on the show today. Okay, so on this episode, I would love it if you could dive into really what is branding, who is branding for, and let's get these really important fundamentals out of the way so people know. And I will also say that you guys, when you're listening to this, make sure that you download the guide that goes along with this episode, because Liz is giving you a complete branding template. So as you work through these podcasts with her and with me over the next couple of weeks, you get to follow along the branding template and actually complete it with these shows. So make sure you go over to SweetLifePodcast.com and grab that. So yeah, Liz, take us through branding fundamentals, the important parts that we need to know first.
Okay. Well, let me break down a little bit the different components of a brand, right? So, and I'm going to start with almost even like, why is it called branding? It's called branding because, hundreds of years ago when farmers, ranchers, landowners, whatever, they had to label their livestock. And so they used a brand. Duh. Okay, so, but everybody in that village, community, whatever, they knew when they saw that brand, what farm or ranch that livestock belonged to. So kind of similar to today, when you see a mark, what we call a mark or an icon or a logo, right? Oh, that's Starbucks, or that is, name any kind of brand out there, right? You know that. And so that's one component of a brand, right? What we call the visual brand. So that's, colors, type treatment, Instagram filters, anything that you create as your visual brand system. But that's just really, and a lot of times people think, oh, that's my brand. No, and as you learned many, many moons ago, that there's this whole other side to branding, because, we humans are complicated people, and so we associate a lot of things with the brand, such as, the story of the brand, right? The tone of the brand, the voice of the brand, what that brand's value proposition is. What is that problem that brand is uniquely solving, for their target audience. Then people have feelings, right? People have opinions. So the other part to a brand is how people feel about you, how people talk about you, their experiences with you. So part of branding, I almost say half of branding you can control, because that's what you put out there. The other half is what your target audience or just people in the community say about you and how they feel about you.
Okay, so, and I think that that's what people are missing. I love that you explained that. And I actually forgot that that's where branding came from too. But, my sister is a horse girl. So you say that and all of a sudden it comes right back to me. I'm like, of course, it's branding, that makes so much sense. And that explanation makes it so much clearer. So we have this visual side of the brand, and then we have the, would you say like the emotional side of the brand? Is that how you would?
So I would say, so you have the visual component, and then you have the messaging, right? So it's the story you're telling, how you're telling it, the tone that you're telling it in. And then the almost the third component is your customer's experience with you, their feelings about you, right? Their perception.
Okay, so our listeners now know, if they didn't know prior to this, that This is why your logo is not necessarily your brand, because you're missing 2/3 of the rest of the brand story and what needs to be told in order to actually build a brand that leaves a legacy. Okay, so talk to me a little bit. Why exactly does a company? It doesn't matter how small. We're talking to women just like me and you. You know, they're sitting, driving their car, listening to this, or wherever, cooking dinner, or wherever they are. Why does, for one individual person, why is it so important for her to go through this process, just like it is for Nike to go through this process?
Well, typically, let's say you have a new service, you're launching a new company, you have a new service, a new product, right? Well, you're going to find yourself in one of two situations. Either you're launching your program, and much like you did when you launched Sweet Pea Baby Planners, right? That was a whole new category, a whole new industry. So you had to, not only did you have to get out the word about Sweet Pea Baby Planners, but you had to educate people about what this was and why they needed it, right? Why this was missing from their lives. So you have, you may need to educate a whole possible target audience about a new category. Or you're entering the marketplace and boom, from day one, you have 2 competitors, 5 competitors, 10 competitors, whatever it may be. You have to tell people in that situation, you have to tell people why they should care, why you're different, and how you're going to solve their problem. And you can't just be like, oh, well, I do this, and kind of babbling on, even if you're not speaking, even if you're you're writing it on your website. People don't have time for that. People don't have patience for that. You need to be succinct. You need to be clear. And so you need to know, who you are, who you appeal to, what problem you're uniquely solving, and why they should care.
Okay, so talk to us now a little bit about that. I mean, that makes so much sense. And then this is, well, let me kind of take a little side dodge here, and my listeners know I do this. I try not to do it that much, you guys. Sorry, but it's like squirrel. When somebody has these components, and I know a lot of our listeners are figuring out, what do I put on social media? What do I put on Instagram? You guys, and we talk about this a lot on the show, you need to have a consistent message, and you do need to do exactly what Liz said about training an audience on what to think about you, what to believe in about you, what to understand about you. And one of the things I just wanted to say to that is that, because of the fact I hear so many times from so many clients, what do I put on my Instagram and what should I share? That's a clear indicator that you haven't gone through this branding process. Mm-hmm. And so once you do go through this branding process, like Liz is talking about, those decisions become clear and you strategize them, and then you can take them and test them to the market. But if you're finding yourself, again, in this position where you're like, gosh, I'm just not really sure what to share, I'm throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall, it's because you haven't gone through the branding process and gotten your messaging right. So, can you dive in a little bit more and tell people, how are they going to use their branding?
Yeah, I think that's really important, because a lot of times people get this and they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. Maybe they knew they needed it, right? And then they kind of get it and it's like, well, now what do I do with it? Something really basic, and something that happens when you very first start your company, you launch it, or even before that, you're already out there networking. And I know, a few months ago, you had a whole podcast devoted to networking and how you do that. And your guest talked about how when you go in and you say, oh, my name is Liz McFadden, I'm with Novella Brand House, da-da-da-da-da. And you've got to have that spiel. And it has to be quick and clear and concise. There is an example of why you need a brand strategy. Because if you have not worked through all those things that we just talked about, when you go to stand up and you introduce yourself and your company, you're going to ramble on. And people are going to lose interest. People are going to think, well, that sounds like a neat idea, but those people don't have their act together, or whatever it is, right? If you're pitching maybe possible investors or possible partners, that's another reason. You spoke about just a minute ago about Instagram and social media. We hear all the time, well, I don't know how I know how to explain my company. I know what we do, but I don't know how to say that, or what to say and when to say it on social media. So your brand strategy becomes evergreen content for social media. It becomes the little about thing, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. It might help you figure out kind of what your content strategy should look like and things like that. When you're pitching, maybe, when you're talking to the media, this is another thing we talk about a lot. So one of the things in a brand strategy are key messages, the 3 things that you want to talk about. We'll talk more about what that is. But when let's say you're being interviewed by the media, a reporter, a blogger, or an influencer, right? You have to, in your mind, again, you want to have that little one sentence that we just talked about that you might stand up with at a networking event. But you also want to have those 3 key things that you want to make sure that you're getting across that, uniquely explain your company and are on brand.
Yeah, and that's in history. I remember when you started working with me to get that initial press, and that was one of the really important things that I remember you helping me walk through. And one of the reasons why I do think that I was able to land so much media attention so long ago, and very quickly within the first 8 months, I think of launching my company because we had my messaging very, very clear on that. Okay, so what else do we need to know about the fundamentals and basics of branding in order for people to have a springboard to download the branding template? And so, work that they need to be doing based on the guide that you're giving them with this podcast this week?
Well, some things that, some of the things that we're going to work through for branding are positioning. So competitive analysis. So thinking about who are your competitors. That could be direct competitors, could be indirect competitors. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Your target audience. Who are your target audience? Who are you going after? And this is something that we work through. You don't have to know this exactly when you start doing a brand strategy, because that's really part of the process, is really narrowing down who your audience is, so you know how to talk to them, what things are going to resonate for them, what kind of information they're looking for, like what kinds of things do you need to put in your messaging to describe your company. The tone, maybe the look and feel, or the voice that you want. I just had a meeting yesterday with a potential client, and we were, kind of going through some of these things. And she said, I want to be quirky and I want to be fun. And, so it's like, okay, getting that, start thinking. These are some things that you want to start thinking about before you really begin that branding process. Have kind of an idea of where you want to go.
Okay, perfect. And those are the things we're going to talk about more in depth in next week's episode. So I have a couple questions I'm going to run by you just based on the questions that I receive from clients. And they're a little random, but you're the best person I know. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have had these same questions. So the first question is, if somebody had started out with a bad brand or not understanding their brand, in your expert opinion, is it ever too late to change that, or should they totally start from scratch, or is there a brand pivot? What do people that started out wrong because they might have hustled into their launch and didn't know that? What's your best advice for them to pivot?
So we actually work with a lot of clients like that, and we call it either it's a rebrand or a refresh of the rebrand or of the brand. And honestly, that happens really throughout the life cycle of your company. But especially in the beginning, don't stress about, oh gosh, I've gone down this direction and that's not feeling right, or I was just throwing stuff together. I threw up a website and I just had to get copy up there. You know what? That's fine. Start to kind of make a list of what's working, what's not, maybe some of the messaging that you are feeling like is resonating with people, right? Like when you're saying it, you're out there networking, you're talking about your company, and people are like, oh yeah, okay, I get that. And then maybe make a list of some things that you're saying or doing that people are like, I don't like, that doesn't make sense to me, or you lose them. Maybe you're bringing them along and you say something, or you've had a post on Instagram or wherever and you kind of lost people, like the engagement fell off. Make note of that too, but kind of start to look at what's working, what's not. And honestly, it's never too late to pivot, and that's a natural thing in business, especially when you get started, because you kind of start with a plan of the products and services that you think are totally going to sell or work, and then you realize, I don't do that as well as the competition does. They're killing it and it's not worth it for me. Or, you know what, my target audience doesn't really want that. This is what they're wanting. And usually businesses run into that.
Yeah, and I can just say, being a case study of working with you, that you guys are going to see a brand shift in a rebrand, if you will, again, through me, through aprilbeach.com and the Sweet Life podcast. And those are some of the things that you guys, being listeners here, you get the inside scoop. When the show releases, we won't even have done it yet. So you can kind of follow along and watch that process change. And the reason why, and this might apply to some of our listeners as well, the reason why we're doing this is because I actually have so many different businesses and so many different components to what I do and so many different programs from being in business for so long that sometimes I hear from you guys that it's confusing. You're like, okay, April, are you aprilbeach.com? And what is this Baby Planner Inc. company that you also own? And so if you're in a place where you've had all of these little different things or big different things, whatever they may be, and it's hard because your audience or your community or your tribe is fragmented, then there's also this purpose of going back together and bringing it all back in one, which is a process that you and I are going to be working through over the next couple of months. And so just to kind of share that with you guys as well. So it doesn't matter if you're new in business or if you've been in business for a really long time and have a lot of different passions and a lot of different niches that you work in, like I am, that there's a process of bringing that back together. And it was really interesting too, before we started recording this episode, that Liz, that you were even sharing, your own processes of always needing to kind of revisit your brand and make sure it's pertinent, make sure it's right, make sure it's up to date. So this isn't like a set it and forget it forever. We want it to be solid, right? We want it to be solid as we possibly can be in the beginning, but people are going to expect that they will go through a rebrand process.
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking before the things got going with this, that in fact, at my company, we're rebranding ourselves right now. Not like our logo and stuff like that, but the messaging and the strategy, because we haven't updated that in 5 years. I mean, a truly update, right? So the thing is, just like you as a person, your business is constantly evolving because you're evolving and the marketplace is evolving and your target audience is changing. So, as you go through that, your business goes through that process. And maybe it's even more, you're going from startup to scaling, right? So much changes in that. Well, your brand has to change with you. Or what's going to happen is what you're kind of putting out there is not the experience that people will have with you. So that always has to go together.
Love it.
What you're putting out there and what the experience truly is.
Gotcha.
Those need to mesh.
And where you want to go as a company too.
Right.
Like a lot of our listeners are paying attention to that too. Like you're saying, they are in the scaling process as well. Okay, this is awesome. So just to recap, in this episode, you guys, we talked about, what is a brand? Why is it important? Who needs a brand? Why is it called branding? And if you didn't know already, you learned that branding is part visual, but it's also part your messaging and the story you're telling. And unless you have all three of those components together, then you're not going to be telling a complete brand story, and your brand is not going to be able to build a legacy that I know you guys all want to have for your business. And so your action item based on this episode is to download the the branding template that Liz has for you, and then join us next week as we walk back through the stages of actually how to go through the branding process. So thank you so much for being on this show and kicking this off. If you guys have questions for Liz, if you want to connect with Liz, I want you to cruise over to Instagram and find Novella Brand House, and we'll make sure the links for all of that are in the show notes of this episode. And they're just doing an amazing job over there, and it's really a company that I want you to have in your arsenal of weapons as you grow as an entrepreneur. Liz, thanks for being on this episode. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.